Before we begin the story of the silent dog who helped a paralyzed boy walk again, a true story of healing and hope, I invite you to get comfortable. Let the world fade for a while. If you find yourself drawn into these quiet tales, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps more stories find their way to the firelight. Now, let's begin. They say certain things arrive only when the veil is thin, between waking and memory, between sorrow and something just this side of magical. They say one spring night, when the moon hung low like a question, a boy who hadn't stood in 2 years met a dog that had no voice. No one saw him arrive. The dog, that is. He was simply there, sitting like a statue in the garden, fur the color of fireplace ash, dripping with the last whispers of rain. His eyes? Strange things. Clouded like fogged glass, yet sharp enough to quiet the whole world. There'd been thunder earlier, but now, the only sounds were the wind sweeping the lilac branches and the quiet hum of a house that had long grown too still. Inside, Ben sat by the window, half asleep in the green wheelchair he'd named Ember, for no real reason but comfort. His fingers traced circles on the armrest, watching the silver flecks of moonlight ripple on the wet path outside. That's when he saw it. Not movement, stillness. And sometimes, that's even more startling. A dog, unmoving. His mother hadn't noticed. The television murmured in the other room, something about storm warnings and rainfall totals. His father dozed on the couch. But Ben leaned forward, nose nearly to the glass. His breath fogged a little crescent on the window pane. The dog did not blink. Did not flinch. Did not bark. It was this quiet, this impossible quiet, that struck Ben as the most startling thing of all. Dogs bark. Dogs yip. Even the old one they used to have, a shaggy mutt named Copper, would sing at wind chimes. But this one? Like a ghost dressed in fur. Ben rolled back from the window. Something stirred in him. Not instinct. Not even curiosity. Something older. Like a bell inside his chest someone rang for the first time in years. He wheeled to the door, glancing behind to make sure he wasn't already being scolded. No one followed. The air outside bit his skin in the fresh, after-rain way. The ramp off the porch creaked like it always did. The tires of his chair squeaked once. Loud. Then, quiet again. The dog still didn't move. Not a blink. Not even a twitch when Ben rolled within arm's reach. Only when Ben extended a hand, slow, trembling, expecting teeth or caution or at least some shadow of uncertainty, did the dog lift one paw. Not in alarm. In offering. He placed it softly on Ben's knee. No sound. No growl. Not even the thump of a tail. Just contact. And that's when Ben noticed it. Not physically, not immediately. But something shifted in that moment. Something in the air. In the part of him that had forgotten how to run. Forgotten how it felt, to expect motion from a body that no longer listened. For 2 full years, his legs had not given him anything but stillness. But now? They warmed. Slightly. Faintly. Like something flickering deep down in the bones, in the roots of his being. He said nothing aloud, just stared into those odd glassy eyes. And he should have been afraid. But he wasn't. Because somehow, though he hadn't spoken a word to this silent stranger, he understood. The dog wasn't there as a pet. Not even as company. He was there for something that could not be named. Later, his parents would ask what made him go outside that night. If he thought he saw something, or dreamed something. But Ben would only say, "He called me," yet no sound had been made. Not by voice. Not with a bark. No bark ever came. Not that night. Not ever. And that was how it began. The boy who hadn't stood in 2 years. And the dog who never made a sound. Before Ben fell, he was known as the boy who chased the wind. He'd tie pillowcases around his neck like capes and leap off porch steps as if gravity were just a suggestion. The neighborhood kids said he could run faster than the shadow of a hawk. Some afternoons, he'd swirl so fast in the yard that even the robins tilted their heads in mild confusion. He'd shout into the sky, daring clouds to follow him. He believed the wind liked him best, whispered secrets only he could catch, tugged at his sleeves like a friend asking to play just one moment more. His feet knew the dirt in the woods, the curve of every hill near the stream behind the house. There were no doors he didn't try to open, no puddle he didn't believe he could leap over, or into, and come out somewhere entirely new. Somewhere impossible. Then came the hike. Autumn, the trees red as spilled ink. His father had promised just one more walk before the cold made the trails impassable. They brought a thermos of cider and a bag of dried apples. Ben wore his favorite jacket, patched at the elbows and stained at the cuffs from heroics only he remembered. They laughed about squirrels, threw stones into leaf piles. And then, a stone rolled beneath his foot. That was it. A single stone, hidden in the leaves. A wrong angle, a wrong second, one step, then another. Then none. The slope wasn't even that steep, but the way he landed stole more than his breath. Stole more than just the afternoon. After that came the white rooms. The beeping machines. The doctors with words that felt like removed staircases. Incomplete spinal cord fracture. They said he might regain function. Might. A word that clangs like a dropped bell. Possibility salted with fear. They tried treatments. Needles. Braces. Gentle promises. But as months turned into seasons, Ben sat more and moved less. His mother stopped signing mail with smiley faces. His father spoke softer than before, like anything louder might shake something loose. Ben didn't cry much. He just got quiet. He gave away the cape. Left it folded in a drawer where socks once lived. He no longer shot rubber bands out the window or raced the breeze down the hallway. The house shushed itself. Time moved slowly, like syrup through a cold bottle. The wind, if it still whispered to anyone, had found someone else to chase. At night, Ben listened to the ceiling fan, counting each tick like a lost footstep. He no longer believed he would walk again. Not truly. Hope didn't leave all at once. It trickled, until even dreams stopped bothering. And then, one night, after a day full of gray sky and flat conversation, he wheeled himself to the window. It was raining soft, not weeping, not lashing, just, it fell, small and endless, like static on the skin. Ben watched droplets gather on the glass in little armies. Outside, the garden sagged, waterlogged and waiting for sun. That's when it happened. A flicker in the corner of his eye. Not light, not sound, presence. He turned toward it and felt something old and impatient stir in him. A hum he couldn't name, beneath the ribs. Like how songs begin long before the first note is sung. Nothing moved on the path. But still, he knew. Something was coming. Or maybe, something had already arrived. The night the dog appeared, the storm had just passed, like a sigh at the end of a long cry. Everything shimmered in its wake, sidewalks painted slick, branches glassy with dew, the grass holding the last echoes of thunder. The gate at the side of the house, usually kept shut with its old iron latch, stood ajar, nudged by wind, perhaps, or something else. Morning came slow and gray. The kind of morning that pulls the world gently from sleep instead of dragging it out. Birds hadn't begun yet. The sky hadn't made up its mind. That was when Ben saw him. Still as a statue. Planted in the garden. Not digging, not sniffing, not pacing or yawning in that restless way dogs do. Just sitting there in the wet, unmoving. Watching the house. He must have been soaked. His coat hung in careful, damp clumps, the color of wet ash. One ear slightly bent, like it had forgotten how to stand upright. And his eyes, those glass smoke eyes, met Ben's like he'd been expected. Ben blinked hard, then wheeled forward on the porch. Something in his chest did not thump, it held still too, in strange chorus with the dog. At first, Ben thought it might have been a trick. Like how shadows seem sharper near dawn. But when he leaned against the porch railing and tilted his head, the dog did the same, just enough to make the world feel deeply, entirely real. He wasn't afraid, not exactly, just uncertain. It wasn't every day a ghost-colored dog waited patiently in your garden, as if he had an appointment. Ben called softly, "Hey there." No wag, no flinch, not even the recognition that animals usually give, a tilt, a turn. Just silence. Heavy, gentle silence. Ben wheeled forward again, down the ramp beside the hedges, his fingers grazing the handrims like drifting oars in water. His mother hadn't noticed. She was in the kitchen, the coffee pot hissing. His father was already gone for errands. The world hadn't caught on to the moment yet. Only the wet earth and the boy in motion. As he approached, the smell reached him, clean, like sky in spring, but tinged with musk and something older. Like wet bark, or forgotten firewood, a few feet away now. Close enough to see the dog's paws were muddy but dry, like he hadn't stepped in the puddles. Like he'd been under shelter and came here only just before the sun began to rise. Ben stopped moving, let the chair settle into the lawn, its wheels making soft impressions on the damp soil. Neither he nor the dog said anything. They just looked. Then, the dog lifted one paw. Not abruptly, not with playfulness, with weight and poise and exact, unhurried intent. He raised it halfway, then held it suspended. Not shaking, not testing. Just letting it hover like punctuation. Ben blinked. "That for me?" The dog said nothing, of course. Didn't even breathe loud enough to hear. But the paw came down, carefully, pressing, a light weight, right onto the rubber sole of Ben's shoe. Contact. No more, no less. And something, a strange uncoiling in Ben's chest, released. Not just pressure. Memory. Like an old cassette player inside him switching on with a click. For a moment, his legs warmed again. Not deeply, not enough to be certain. But enough to notice. That small tingle near the hip joints. That phantom echo of motion. His breath caught. "You're not lost, are you?" he whispered. Still, the dog said nothing. Ben took it as agreement. He reached forward, hand trembling slightly, fingers stretched toward that damp ash fur. The dog did not step back. Did not move at all, save to lean, just barely, into the touch. There was something ancient in it. Not old in years, old like stone, old like lullabies handed down through the hush of time. When Ben stroked the dog's head, he felt warmth. Real warmth. Not just body heat, but something else. Something that bloomed gently where it passed, into his palm, up into his forearm. And for the first time in far too long, Ben smiled. He didn't know yet what this meant, or even who this creature was. But some part deep in his bones understood this wasn't coincidence. The dog had come as sure as any letter arrives. Not on a mission, not burdened with purpose, only presence. From the porch, his mother's voice called out, "Ben? You okay out there?" He looked back and replied before thinking, "Yeah. I've got company." She didn't hear that last word. Didn't see anything when she peered through the rain-misted glass. But Ben knew. It didn't matter. Some guests, only the invited can recognize. They put up signs. Bright ones, yellow-papered with black marker letters hurried and hopeful. One on every street corner within a mile. Ben's mother taped one to the window of the bakery, slid another into the bulletin board at the library. They called the shelters in town, and the ones further out. Spoke to the old man with too many poodles near the post office. Driven by decency, by habit, by the world's rules, because dogs like that don't just arrive. Someone must have lost him. But no one called, no posters came down, and in the silence that followed, something deeper took root. Maybe he wasn't lost at all. They named him Whisper, because that's what he was. Not breathless, but gentle. Not mute, but beyond the need. No collar, no tag, just time, always time. Wherever Ben went, the dog followed. No leash needed, as if tied not by rope but by something threaded between them. Something unseen but undeniable. He never barked when the mail came. Didn't beg during dinner. Didn't even chase the squirrels that taunted from fence tips. He simply accompanied, shadowed, waited. If Ben wheeled to the porch, Whisper would lie at his side. If Ben headed to the backyard under the late spring sun, the dog would pad a half-step behind. At night, Ben swore he could hear him breathing in the hallway. Not loud, not a pant, just a quiet exhale, like the house itself had remembered how to breathe again. Ben's mother was skeptical at first. He might be sick, she'd said, watching the dog curl into the corner of Ben's room like he'd been born there. Or trained too harshly. That's why he doesn't speak. Ben had only shaken his head. He doesn't have to. When she looked into the dog's eyes, something shifted in her too. Not fear, not even confusion, just awareness, as if recognizing something she didn't have a name for. She brought out blankets, left an old soup bowl on the floor. One morning, Ben's father tried whistling to Whisper. Nothing. He clapped his hands. Still nothing. But when Ben wheeled out of his room dressed and ready, the dog rose instantly. Moved beside him with that elegant quiet, step for step. "What kind of dog is he, you think?" his father asked. "I don't recognize the breed. Not a kind you find in books," Ben muttered, almost to himself. Soon, it was simply normal. As if the house had always included a silent gray dog who claimed no corner and disturbed no rug. When visitors came, few as they were, Whisper vanished. Not fearful, just absent. Returned only when silence did. One night, as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, Ben rolled to the living room window. Whisper followed, then circled once before lying at his feet. Together, they watched the pulsing shimmer of distant lightning. Ben reached down, habit by now, and let his fingers rest on the soft of the dog's back. "Do you remember things too?" he whispered. A pause, a stillness, then a nudge, barely there, but felt. That week, Ben began sketching again. His hands, though stiff from disuse, remembered shapes. He drew trees, hills, a boy who looked like him, standing. Always, the silent dog stood beside that boy. He hid the drawings under his pillow. They weren't secrets, only private wishes, frail as dandelions. Whisper never touched them, but every time Ben tucked one away, the dog would place his head across Ben's feet before sleep. As if guarding something, or bearing witness. Days turned quietly golden. The garden bloomed. The breeze softened, and no one came to claim the dog with glassy eyes and ash-colored fur. Because he didn't need to be claimed. He had answered a call no one else had heard. 3 weeks passed like a sigh held just a little too long. Days full of repetition and soft rituals. The rustle of bedsheets in the morning. The slow pour of milk into oatmeal. The soft creak of wheels on hardwood. Whisper was always there. He didn't sleep in Ben's room, not exactly, but existed just outside it. Rested better on thresholds, it seemed. Doorway spots. In between places. When the house dimmed into sleep and dreams tiptoed in, you could hear the faint shift of paws repositioning. But no footsteps. Never footsteps. Ben's legs still lay quiet more often than not, coiled under blankets or propped with cushions. Some days, he tried to forget they were his. Other times, just forgot they were there at all. The doctors spoke in calendars. They charted shoulds and maybes. Small movements. Unreliable twinges. But they never mentioned moments like this. Ben had dropped his pencil. A soft clatter on the wooden floor, near the shaded corner of the living room. He'd been sketching, nothing important. Just lines and half-shapes. Another version of the meadow. A hill he hadn't seen in nearly a year. When the pencil landed near his chair leg, Ben leaned down to scoop it up. Just a stretch, reaching through the spaces between the world he remembered and the one he was now stitched into. And in that stretch? His fingers closed stronger than expected. It was small, a twitch, really, but it carried more meaning than even he realized. His wrist flexed with steadiness. His elbow adjusted, and deep beneath it all, a pulse of something. A murmur of connection from brain to muscle. Like two strangers recognizing each other in a crowd. He blinked, adjusting in his seat. Then the dog moved. Whisper had been dozing across the room, head tucked between his paws, tail wrapped neatly against his flank. Alert, always, but not interfering. Now, he stood slowly. Crossed the space between them with an elegance that suggested nothing hurried, but everything precise. No bark. Not even a huff. He padded forward and, without ceremony, lowered his chin to rest lightly on Ben's shoe. Not looking up, not demanding notice, just contact. The weight was negligible. The meaning, impossible. Ben didn't speak. Couldn't. His throat cinched with something. Some mix of wonder and disbelief, some ember of memory flickering to full flame. He stared down at the pencil in his hand, then at the dog, then back at his hand again. There was heat in his legs. Soft, subtle, like the whisper of warm tea steaming into closed rooms. Not enough to move, not yet, but enough to notice, enough to remember what it used to feel like when his legs were alive with mischief. I felt that, he whispered, more to himself than to the dog. Whisper didn't lift his head. Didn't blink. Just gently shifted his weight again, his breath slow and even, seeping through the stillness like music without notes. Ben reached down low, pressing his palm softly against the dog's fur. There was something beyond texture, a current of presence that didn't quite translate into words. It was like holding a memory that had chosen to return. Later, with sun angling through the tall windows in dusty gold ribbons, Ben tried again. Moved his left foot. Not a step. Not even a slide. A twitch. That was all. But it was real. And when he glanced over, Whisper had already sat beside him again. Waiting. As if they'd agreed on this. As if some ancient arrangement had been reawakened. One paw on the past, one step toward something unnamed. Ben didn't call for his parents. He didn't log the twitch in his therapy journal. For now, it was just theirs. This soft shift. This small, impossible beginning. They sat like that for a while. A boy and his silent dog. No witnesses. No announcements. Only the breath between them and the quiet knowing that something had happened. Not a miracle, but the moment before one. The doctors said it was nothing unusual. Incomplete spinal damage often leaves shadows of signals behind, moments where the body forgets to be broken. Neurological misfires, they called them, like weather patterns in the nerves. But the timing felt too aligned to be coincidence. Because each time something stirred, some tiny flicker in Ben's legs or hands or shoulders, Whisper was already there. Not approaching after, but arriving before. As if he knew. As if his stillness somehow prepared the world for motion. Ben's parents wanted to be cautiously optimistic. The word progress had been offered before, always shrouded in disclaimers. Temporary, anomalous, don't get ahead of ourselves. But how do you measure hope with a thermometer? Ben stopped telling them everything. He didn't lie, he just let the small moments be his own. The curl of a toe. The ability to shift his hips on his own in bed. Private milestones. Whisper remained constant through it all. Soft step at his side, warm breath by his ear on early mornings when fog still clung to the windows. He would follow Ben's chair as if navigating a map written in memory. He positioned himself with uncanny precision, a silent brace when Ben leaned down or reached awkwardly, always at just the right place to keep him balanced. The physical therapist noticed. "Ever thought of making him a service dog?" she asked once, watching the gray shadow trail close behind. Ben had only smiled. He doesn't need a title. Their outings grew. At first, small, just down to the end of the block and back. Then further. Past the grocery store, the library steps, the cricket fields abandoned until summer. Ben's hands grew stronger, wrists less brittle. His arms pumped cleaner and more certain. But more than muscles, it was balance that returned. And balance is something deeper. Not just about core strength, it's about trust. Every time Ben felt the tilt, that slip of gravity trying to remind him of his limits, Whisper was there. Sometimes by simply standing still. Other times by gently pressing into Ben's leg like grounding salt. They no longer used words. Ben spoke less in general. Not because he was hiding anything, but because silence had become the most honest language between them. When things hurt, or didn't, or nearly did, Whisper would simply exhale. And Ben would understand. On the third Wednesday of April, Ben got up without reason. Just rose in bed. No one coached him. No prompt. He sat upright. Planted his feet. Didn't stand, but didn't slump either. And there, right beside the bed, was Whisper. Quiet as breath. His nose lightly touched Ben's shin as if saying, "I know." Not progress. Not miracle. Just a moment, shared. He didn't bother charting it. Instead, that night, he drew again. But this time it wasn't a meadow, or a hill, or a boy facing forward. It was a view from behind. A wheelchair standing empty under an oak. A gray dog walking ahead, just far enough to say, "Come along now." And that was what it felt like, more than healing, being led into the unknown not by science, but by silence willing to wait beside you. Whisper never intruded, never forced. He offered presence the way porch lights offer return in the dark. Always there, without needing to be asked. And in that space, Ben felt something shift. He began to believe, not just in walking again, but in walking towards something. It was a Tuesday, soft with sunlight and new green. The kind of day that smells faintly of damp bark and thawed roots, where the world starts to remember how to bloom. A year had passed since the wheelchair came. Since pillowcase capes became drawer ghosts and laughter turned to careful nods. But that day held something different. The air felt lighter, like the sky had exhaled. Ben had no plans, no therapy appointment, no errands. Just him and Whisper, who had taken to curling up near the back door when mornings warmed. Grass hissed under the wheels of his chair as he rolled out, no destination in mind, just motion for the sake of knowing what direction tasted like. Whisper stood when he passed, silent as breath, then began walking. Forward, not hasty, not coaxing. Just moving. Ben followed. The dog didn't look back. Didn't wait, but never left the edge of what followed possible. He wound through the side yard, past the lilac bush, down the path behind the shed, and further, toward the edge of where they used to walk before the world changed shape. Beyond the back fence lay the forgotten field. Once a cow pasture, then wild, then a crisscross of child-made trails that led to the old mill's stream. Ben hesitated. Whisper stopped, waited, then padded forward again, just a few feet, tail raised not high but hopeful. Ben's fingers clenched the rims. His arms ached already, but something inside him tugged, not at muscle, not at bone. At memory. He pushed on. The slope was gentle at first, undulating with spring's soft sighs. The ground gave beneath him in wet squish, resisting slightly. Wheels grumbled against mud. Still Whisper went, pausing now and then, not instructing, simply offering. By the time they reached the brook, Ben's chest was a small storm of exhaustion and wonder. The stream whispered as it always had, nimble and distracted, trailing pieces of sky with it. Whisper crossed the water with no splash, stepping on stones that jutted like forgotten teeth in the creek bed. He turned back then, eyes narrow, ears dipped. Waiting, not urging. Ben looked down. His chair faced the bank, where the roots of a fallen tree made a low bridge to the stream's edge. He didn't think. He moved. One foot shifted, then the other. His arms gripped the chair's push rims, but didn't hold all the weight. He stood. Every joint blinked in shock. His knees wobbled, ankles argued, but he stood, uneven but upright. A full breath, a full heart. His left foot stepped forward. Then right. Sloppy. Ridiculous. Real. Across the brook, Whisper remained still as the rocks. Ben stepped again, not for doctors, not for charts, for the stream, for the sky reflected in it, for the dog who waited without needing to speak. At the water's edge, he stopped. Legs quivering, arms out for balance. And then, as if the world was in on the moment, the wind mumbled through the grass. Whisper gave one wag of his tail. Not excited, affirming. Then he turned, and walked back to Ben's side. No theatrics, no triumph, only witness. Ben sat slowly, carefully, the chair still behind him like fate remembered. He placed a hand on Whisper's neck. "Thank you," he said. There was no answer. But there had never needed to be. Ben started drawing again, not with the urgency he once had, with pencils clutched like swords and sketches scattered like feathers in a windstorm, but slowly, like someone relearning the way their hands move when trying to tell a secret. His wrists were steadier now, his grip more certain. But the change wasn't only in the way his fingers worked. It was in what he drew. Meadows stretched wide and endless. Trees bent in midlaugh, their branches welcoming rather than warning. Hills rolled gently, like sighs turned into land. And always, always, a boy walked through them. Not with a limp or a brace. Not pushed, not carried. He walked on his own legs. Beside him was the dog. Never at his heel, never ahead, just there. Whisper. Ben never named him in the pictures. He didn't have to. His face, though never entirely clear in the drawings, held that same unreadable calm. Those eyes that seemed to watch something more than just the world around him. Something inside. He kept the drawings under his pillow. Not hidden, but held. Like something fragile. Something still growing. No one asked to see them. His parents knew better by now. They'd watched him lose too many things. These private little worlds belonged only to Ben, for now. Or maybe forever. Each night, after brushing his teeth and changing into the loose, soft clothes that made movement easier, he'd slide a piece of paper from under his pillow and add a tiny detail. A tree, a path, a star, the curve of the dog's paw print in loose sand. Then he'd tuck it back. And that's when Whisper would come. Never entering with sound, never padding heavily across the floor. Just arriving. Like memory, like dusk. He'd sit beside the bed. Sometimes he'd curl up beneath it. But more often, he'd place one paw gently, carefully, on Ben's bent knee, resting it there for only a moment before letting it fall away. Ben didn't speak during these moments. Neither did the dog. There was no need. It became routine, or rather, ritual. A soft exchange between boy and beast, between the ache of what had been and the quiet possibility of what might still be. Some nights, Ben would wake in the small hours, disturbed not by dreams, but by something else. A shift in air, a change in the weight of the world. He'd open his eyes and there, beyond the end of his bed, in the hallway just outside the door, a shape would wait. Gray, still, just watching, not guarding, not looming, witnessing, and then, like a page turning, gone. Ben never felt abandoned when Whisper disappeared into the shadows. Instead, it felt like a promise being fulfilled. I'm here. I always have been. Go on. One night near the end of spring, the moon sat full and stunned in the sky. Stars blinked faint behind a gauze of clouds. Ben stepped to the window without using his chair. Just a few quiet paces. An experiment in belief. He leaned on the sill and placed one of his drawings upright in the moonlight. This one showed him standing alone on a hilltop, arms raised, not like a hero, not like someone showing victory. Just someone open, ready, listening, and in the sky above him, a shape floated, not winged, not wingless. Not quite a dog, not a dog. Ben rested his hand on the windowsill, steadying himself. The curtains fluttered just slightly, though no breeze passed. Behind him, on the bed, the pillow dipped. As if something had settled there. A faint warmth remained, even after he turned and found nothing. That night, when he slid into bed, Ben whispered, "I think I dreamed us a place. You and me." He felt something press lightly, gently, against the side of his ankle. He smiled into the darkness. Then closed his eyes. One morning, Whisper was gone. No warning, no noise, just absence. The back door still locked. The gate still latched with its stubborn iron hook. No open windows, no muddy paw prints trailing off into the yard. Just the space where he should have been. Empty. Ben noticed it before anyone else. He always did. He wheeled quietly into the hallway, expecting that soft breath, that shift of fur in the light. But the hallway was hollow. The air too still. The silence the wrong kind. "Whisper," he called, even though he knew the name had never really mattered. The kitchen clock ticked. His mother passed behind him humming gently, a tune she couldn't name. "Breakfast in a minute," she said, not reading the way the world had tipped slightly beneath her son. Ben nodded, eyes still scanning. Outside, the sky hung low and colorless, a shade between silver and forgetting. A morning shaped like a pause. He took himself to the porch. Sat on the ramp just long enough to feel the chill of the wood through the wheels. No movement in the grass. No gray shadow rounding the shed. No trail of broken leaves to follow. His chest tightened, but not with panic. Not even sadness. Something quieter. Like watching fog fade from a field where something once stood. A shape gone not because it ran, but because it had never truly belonged to one place. His hand dropped automatically to the side of his chair. No soft head to meet it. He waited. And waited. The rhythm of morning pressed on. His mother set out toast. His father came home from the store, bringing jam and 2 newspapers and a plant no one had asked for. Ben didn't eat right away. He rolled to the edge of the yard, where the lilac bush bent low over the initials he'd once carved into the fence post. He looked to the path that led toward the mill stream. The place where he first remembered walking not as a memory but as something becoming real again. Empty. He didn't cry. He whispered to the wind, he had something else to fix. A robin landed on the fence, chirped once, then fluttered away. Ben sat there for a long time, his coat catching the breeze, the morning slowly unfolding around him. His hands rested in his lap. Heavy, but not helpless. When he finally turned back toward the house, he looked one last time over his shoulder. Just in case. A boy used to believe puddles were portals. Maybe he still did. Inside his room that night, he peeled back the covers slowly, expecting the small warmth at his ankle. It wasn't there. But on the nightstand, beside a folded drawing of the hilltop, lay something strange. A single, gray feather. Not silky like a pigeon's. Not barred like the sparrows that danced in the hedgerow. Softer, lighter, and when he picked it up, it smelled faintly like rain. He held it to his chest. He would tell no one. Some things are only between two hearts. And some departures don't mean absence. Only movement, only change. That night, the air outside was full of hush. Ben didn't say much at dinner. His parents didn't press. There was a right kind of silence, and this one had curled gently around the house like a blanket that knew its place. The kind of quiet that holds space rather than empties it. After the dishes were done and lights dimmed, Ben wheeled himself into his room. Slower than usual, not heavy with sadness, exactly, more like walking around a memory still fresh, unsure if touching it would make it vanish or settle deeper. His mother tucked the blanket at the foot of the bed, just like she always did. Kissed the top of his head without speaking. Then left, soft steps swallowed by carpet. Ben sat still for a while, hands resting on his knees, staring at the moonlight spilling through the window. It caught the glint of a pencil stub on his desk. His latest drawing lay unfinished, just the outline of a path winding into a forest. No figures yet, just space, waiting. With effort, he transferred from chair to bed. Not because he needed to yet, but because he could. The moments when his legs remembered how to hold were few but growing. He measured them in heartbeats, not hours. He lay back slowly, the pillow cold before it warmed to meet him. And then he saw it. A single paw print, pressed faintly into the blanket near his feet. Darker than the fabric, wet just enough to shimmer. He blinked, sat up, touched it. It was cold, not soaked, just lightly damp. Like it had come from a place where the rain still whispered on fallen leaves. He didn't shout, or rub his eyes. He didn't even smile. He placed his hand over the mark, letting his palm feel its echo. And he whispered, not to anyone really, just to something. "You saw that, didn't you?" Because earlier, in the quiet of the afternoon, when the yard had stretched bare and the world almost too still, he had stood again. Only briefly, 20 seconds, no brace, no hand on a wall. Just balance, fragile and flaring. He hadn't called anyone, hadn't tracked the moment with stopwatch or measurement. He'd just looked up at the sky and thought, "You're watching." And now, here it was. Proof, maybe, or just presence. A paw print. Damp, cool, real. He slid under the covers, pulling them gently over the mark, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. As he settled into the soft hush of night, he let one leg stretch slowly. Then the other. Then pulled them both back beneath him. The blankets shifted. He swore, for the smallest second, he felt another shape beneath them. The weight, the warmth, the curve of something curled and breathing. But when he looked, nothing there. Only stillness. The ceiling above him flickered with tree shadows stirred by wind. He reached to the nightstand and took the feather. Slipped it under his pillow. Closed his eyes. And in the dark, with nothing but the sound of the house holding its breath, Ben whispered. "I'm still listening." Outside, branches moved in the breeze. Not restless, just remembering. And somewhere just beyond the edges of sleep, he swore he felt a tongue press once, gently, to the tip of his fingers. Not to wake him, just to say, yes. Ben began writing letters, not long ones, just folded scraps of notebook paper, stained slightly with graphite, sometimes smudged by thumbprints or teardrops that didn't quite fall. He'd write them at night, tucked cross-legged beneath his blankets, bent over with a flashlight like a boy at camp riding home. They began, simply, Dear Whisper. He wrote about the day. About the things he'd walked past, slowly, purposefully. About the way piano music made his knees ache in a good way, or how the robin returned to the lilac bush and made the wind seem less empty. Sometimes, he wrote about nothing. Just, I miss you, followed by small doodles. A paw print. A tail mid-wag. A boy's feet, uncertain but pointed forward. Then he'd fold the letter twice, nestle it into a cedar box he'd placed in the corner of the garden. Just under the yew tree, behind where the sun hid in the afternoons. Quietly, deliberately. Not as a game, not as a wish. As memory. Ritual. The first time he did it, the note was gone by morning. He thought the wind had taken it. He left a rock over the lid the second time, tucked the paper beneath it. Still, gone. By the fifth letter, he knew. It wasn't wind, not water either, no soggy edges, no filmy ink. Each one simply vanished, like a whisper answered. He didn't tell his parents. It wasn't a secret, not really. But some things are too soft to explain, too easily dismissed by louder kinds of love. Weeks passed. Each letter left. Each letter taken. Sometimes he'd tuck in a small drawing instead, a simple sketch, barely more than a line and the tilt of a tail. He never found them again. But that was never the expectation. Then one day, inside the box, folded neatly into thirds, was a paper that wasn't his. Ben's heart hiccuped when he saw it. It was softer than notebook paper, thinner. Smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. No envelope. Just the crease of care. He opened it. 3 words. Still with you. No name. No more. He read them again. Still with you. His hands trembled slightly as he held the paper. It didn't feel like magic. Or madness. Just true. Like something a person already knows but needs to hear in someone else's handwriting. He placed it back into the cedar box, gently, as if it might shatter. That night, he did not write. He didn't need to. He simply sat beside the yew tree for a long time as dusk settled like breath over the yard. Fireflies blinked, tentative and gold. The air was cool against his face. He didn't call out, didn't ask questions, but when it grew too dark to see, and he wheeled back toward the house, he paused once, beneath the porch light, and looked back through the lilacs. Nothing moved, except maybe the briefest shadow. Just enough to know, someone was still listening. Summer rose like a slow song. Not loud, not a declaration, but warm, vast, and steady. The kind of days that smell like ripe grass and pine dust, when dragonflies hover like ornaments and the woods seem to hum just beneath the bark. Ben could walk now, not perfectly, not far, but enough. The doctors didn't know what to say anymore. They flipped through charts like pages had gone missing. They offered phrases heavy with disbelief, unexpected, nonlinear recovery, anomalous regain. But Ben didn't speak their language anymore. He had his own version of the story. He remembered the stream. He remembered the feather. He remembered the paw print that never should have been there, and the warmth in his limbs long before there was proof. He remembered hope in the shape of quiet. One morning, fueled by a restlessness that tasted like both fear and invitation, Ben suggested they take a hike. His father looked up from the cereal box, eyebrows raised. A hike? Ben nodded. Back to the hill. The one. There was hesitation, of course. The worried glance between his parents, the map they pulled out, tracing backup trails and escape routes. But Ben just stood by the door, backpack already slung, as if he'd been waiting years. The air on the trail was cooler than expected, softened by shade and memory. Ben wore braces, lightweight and low profile. His knees still trembled at uneven terrain, but his feet moved forward. One step, then the next. His father walked beside him, close but not clinging. They talked little. There's a way fathers worry you can hear more in their breathing than their words. The slope came into view just past the cluster of hickories. Smaller than Ben remembered, timed as that. Leaves crackled underfoot. Ben paused once, hands on his knees, breath shallow but sure. His father reached out, but Ben shook his head. "I got it." He did. They made it to the top slower than they would have once. Slower than Ben had dreamed. But speed had stopped mattering. At the peak, breeze kissed sweat from foreheads. The view unfolded gently, fields like spilled cloth, a stand of firs in the distance, the copper flash of the stream they'd visited what felt like forever ago. Ben turned slowly, scanning the trees. Something brushed memory, not vision. He stepped forward. There, on an old beech tree leaning slightly toward the sun, was a mark. A paw print. Low enough a child could have carved it, high enough it wasn't a casual scuff in bark. It had depth, intention. Ben leaned closer, ran his fingers across the softened indent. Below it, carved in slanted, uneven letters, was one word. WHISRPR. His breath caught. His father spotted it too. "Did you?" "No," Ben said, still tracing. Neither of them spoke after that. The tree said enough. They sat on a flat stone for a while. Shared water. Let silence do the stitching. Ben pulled out a folded piece of paper from his back pocket, a drawing from months before. The one with the oak, the empty chair, the dog walking ahead. He tucked it into a nook in the tree's roots. Not for anyone, really. Just to leave something behind. On the walk back down, Ben didn't stumble. Not once. Ben wasn't afraid of falling anymore. Not the way he used to be, when forward movement felt like a gamble and every unexpected shift carried the sharp taste of failure. Now when he stumbled, he laughed. When his feet caught in roots or uneven pavement, he waved it off like wind tousling his hair. Standing again had taught him the value of grace, not just in walking, but in rising. It was summer now, one of those perfect Julys when the days stretched long and thick with green. The fair came through town the second week, pitching its colorful tents in the school's wide field. Flags fluttered from corn dog stalls. A carousel spun slow and tinkling under lights that wouldn't shine until dusk. Ben hadn't gone the year before. Couldn't. But this year, he walked up the gravel path on his own, ticket in hand, his gait a little uneven, but steady. His parents stayed close, watching without hovering. Everything felt louder than he remembered. More colorful, more moving. Children spinning pinwheels in plastic chairs. The scent of funnel cake in the air. Music drifting from rides. All half a step out of tune, but no one seemed to mind. He met up with some kids from school. Some nodded, half remembering who he'd been. One or two asked about his chair in the past tense. Ben just smiled. "Got tired of sitting," he said. They laughed easily. No one pressed. Later, he stood beside the ring toss booth, watching red and blue bottles glint in the sunlight, stacked like secrets. A woman stood at the edge of the tent, old, folded into shadows, her eyes the pale gray of distant mountains. Scarves wrapped around her shoulders despite the heat, and her hands gripped a cane carved with what looked, for the briefest moment, like pawprints spiraling down its shaft. She didn't call him over. She didn't even speak, just watched. Ben noticed her but didn't think much, until they made eye contact. Until her eyebrows lifted, and she gave the smallest of nods. "You've walked far," she said finally. Not loud, not soft, just enough. Ben blinked. "I guess." She smiled. Not wide, not with teeth. Just gently. "They don't always bark, you know." He tilted his head. "Who?" "The ones that come when you need them." She tapped the cane twice on the grass. "Some call them silent guides. I met mine in '61. Smoky Ridge. Thought I was dreaming until he left a feather in my boot." Ben opened his mouth, then closed it again. She nodded once more. "Don't worry. You don't need to understand now." He looked down. Wanted to ask something, but when he glanced up, she was already gone. Not walked away. Not turned. Just not there. Only a faded scent remained. Lavender and something older. Ash and wind. He wandered the rest of the fair lightly, mind half tethered to the sound of her voice, the slight bend in her spine, the unmistakable cadence of someone who'd waited long enough to be heard. By sundown, lights blinked across the field and laughter rippled like stream water. Ben sat at the edge of the hay bale circle where children roasted marshmallows under the glow of citronella torches. He pulled from his pocket a tiny folded paper from earlier that morning, a sketch he hadn't shown anyone. Just a crooked line of forest, and near its edge, a familiar silhouette. Not an exact likeness, just suggestion. A dog that did not bark. A boy still learning not to look back. He unfolded it once, stared, then folded it again and slid it deep into his pocket. Just before the fireworks started, a breeze stirred the edge of the tent flaps. No leaves rustled, but something passed through. Not a sound, not a shape, just a quiet reminder. Not forgotten. Each fall, Ben left a scarf out on the porch. Gray. Always gray. Sometimes it had fringe, sometimes not. Once, it was a sweater sleeve he unraveled during a rainstorm. Another year, it was half-knitted, needles still stuck in the loops. But every October, on the night before Halloween, he'd fold it carefully, place it on the porch rail, and whisper nothing at all. By morning, it was always gone. Not tossed by wind, not carried by raccoons or neighborhood cats. Simply, completely, gone. The first year, he thought it wishful thinking. A tribute to something he couldn't quite let go of. The second year, maybe coincidence. But the third time, the pattern settled into belief. Ben never told anyone why he did it. Maybe because he didn't know entirely. Maybe because it didn't matter. Rituals don't always need reasons. On his 16th birthday, the morning began with fog smoothing over window panes and a thin layer of frost on the garden gate. He stepped outside, slippers barely brushing the stones, and there, waiting on the porch step. A feather. The same shade every year, gray, silvered like weathered bone. But not from any bird he could identify. Not pigeon, not dove, not owl. Something softer, wiser, less tethered to trees or sky. He cupped it in his palm and held it to his chest without words. His mother said the wind did odd things in cold months. His father suggested maybe a neighbor was playing tricks. But what child near them knew him that well? What trickster would be so careful, so precise? When he turned 20, it was raining. Gentle, steady, the kind of rain that turns the whole world into a slow-motion exhale. Still, he laid out the scarf, pressed a flat stone on one corner to keep it from lifting. The next morning, stone still in place, only absence. That year, the feather was left not at the door, but inside his glove. He found it when pulling it on before work. It brushed his fingers like a whisper before settling in his palm. Years passed. The porch aged. He replaced boards, painted over weathered railings. He moved out, then back in for a while. Grew taller, stronger. Walked without hesitation but still glanced over his shoulder sometimes, as if expecting someone to catch up. And every fall, the scarf. Every birthday, the feather. One October, just after his 25th, he was away on a work trip. He mailed the scarf home to himself, knowing it would arrive in time. Asked his dad to place it outside on the porch. Didn't say why. When he returned, the scarf wasn't there. But on his pillow lay a feather. Smooth, unbent, placed with care. He held it between 2 fingers and looked toward the corner of the room, where no wind had been. "Still with me," he murmured. It was never dramatic, never lightning struck, never accompanied by music. Just pattern, gentle as a breath remembered. Some birthdays feel louder than others. When he turned 30, the sky itself was clear, no clouds, only a perfect dome of blue. He sat on the back steps, letting the sun warm his face, scarf already placed the night before. It wasn't there now, but he didn't need to check. A boy raised on wind and silence, on memory and quiet magic, doesn't need confirmation. He reached into his coat pocket to find his keys, and felt the feather there already, waiting. Time, when it moves quietly, does not ask permission. Ben grew up. Not overnight, not all at once. But steadily, like the way snow melts when no one's watching. He finished school. His legs grew stronger, not flawless, but confident. He no longer counted steps. No longer held his breath before doorways or down hills. He moved through the world with the kind of ease that can only be earned after once forgetting how. He never forgot those years, though. The silence. The return of motion. The way belief comes not with thunder but with still breath beside you in the dark. He became a physiotherapist, working with children. Ones who'd slipped between the cracks of motion, just as he once had. He didn't talk about his past much. Not in words. But the way he moved through the room, the way he knelt to meet their gaze, the way his hands steadied with care, it spoke more than any records could. Every patient, at some point in their care, received a gift. A gray plush dog, ash-colored, just the right size for small arms. No sound box, no name tag, only a note tucked inside the ear. Still with you. Some smiled wide when they saw it. Others grew quiet, touching the soft fur like something sacred. A boy once whispered into its ear and then looked up as if expecting an answer. Ben just watched. He never explained. The clinic bore his name, though he claimed it meant little. A name on a door is just that, he'd say. But inside, on the largest wall, the one across from the waiting room, where the morning sun came in with intentional light, hung paintings. Dozens. Framed sketches, watercolors, unfinished graphite outlines. All done by former patients. Children who'd walked again, or moved their hands anew, or found the rhythm of one knee rising after the other. The scenes differed, but there were patterns. Trees, meadows, streams, and always, somewhere in the corner, a shadow of something with 4 legs. Sometimes it was clear, a gray dog, head turned, just watching. Other times, it was suggestive, just a tail disappearing into the woods, a pair of pawprints pressed into snow. Ben never asked for those details. They simply appeared. One morning, a girl with elbow braces limped up to the front desk and handed Ben a crumpled paper. "It happened last night," she said. "I heard something by my window. I looked out, but I didn't see anything. Just a shape." He unfolded the drawing. A crooked house, a night sky, and a single gray figure standing just past the tree line. She pointed. "That's him, right? Your dog?" Ben paused, then nodded. "Maybe." She grinned, satisfied. "I think he's checking up on me." Later that day, as the building emptied and dusk stretched across the floor tiles like spilled shadow, Ben stood alone in the hallway. He looked at the paintings, as he did every week, but this time, he noticed a new one. Unframed, leaning against the wall beneath the window, unsigned. Just a forest. A quiet path through birches, no footprints. And at the curve of the trail, a boy walking. No braces, no chair. But that wasn't what stopped Ben. It was what followed the boy. Not near, not looming, just tagging behind, 4 steps back. A shape, covered in gray, silent as ever. Ben reached out and lifted the painting gently, holding it against his chest for a long time. Not thinking of doctors, not of progress or milestones. Just remembering what it felt like to be carried forward by something that never once asked to be seen. That night, before he left, he turned off each light by hand, moving room to room, and when he passed the main door, he noticed something at the mat. One faint damp paw print, pressed into the fiber, pointed inward. Ben never told his son the whole story. Not out loud, not the way people expect stories to be told, with dates, names, and confirmations. Instead, it came in looks. In the way he paused near windows on quiet mornings. In the way he kept a certain part of the yard clear, untouched by swings or flower beds. In the way his hand occasionally brushed the side of his leg when he walked, as if expecting something to be there. His son, Cal, was a bright-eyed 3-year-old who asked endless questions, sang off-key to himself, and liked pointing at things that weren't there. Ben smiled through it all. Let his son name the stars and invent kingdoms with rulers made of leaves. That autumn, on Cal's birthday, Ben carried him into the orchard behind the house. It wasn't far, just a patch of twisted apple trees that dropped fruit too early and tangled their branches like dancers mid-spin. The grass was tall enough to brush at knees, and the wind had the scent of gathering dusk. Cal wriggled down from Ben's arms the moment they reached the edge of the fence. "I want to walk alone," he declared, already charging ahead with the confident wobble of childhood. Ben let him, watched from the edge of the trees, fingers gently tapping the wood of the gate. Cal disappeared between 2 trees for a moment, his laughter rising above the rustle of leaves. Then quiet, too quiet. Ben tilted his head, stepped forward once, twice, just as Cal reappeared, smiling wider than he had all morning. "Daddy," he called. "I was talking to the gray dog." Ben froze. "What dog?" "The quiet one." Cal pointed back toward the trees. He was sitting in the grass. He didn't even talk, but I think he made a joke. Ben's breath faltered. "What kind of joke?" he asked, heart suddenly loud. "I dunno." Cal waved his arms. "But I laughed and he looked happy." Ben walked over, pace slow, controlled. Cal turned back toward where he'd come from. "He went that way," he said, pointing into the apple shadows. "He said he's gotta go 'cause he's busy, but he didn't use words." "I just knew." Ben knelt and took his son's hand. "What did he look like?" Cal tilted his head, squinting in that thoughtful way only children can. "Gray. Not shiny gray, like soft gray. Like a cloud if it was hugging you." Ben swallowed. Something sharp pressed behind his ribs. "And his eyes?" Cal grinned. "Like glass marbles. But they weren't scary. Just quiet." Ben closed his eyes for a beat, steadying himself in the cool scent of dry leaves. "You believe me?" Cal asked suddenly, voice small. Ben looked at him, heart full and aching. "I do." "Good," Cal nodded. "'Cause he was real. And nice." Behind them, the trees whispered in a wind that hadn't existed a moment ago. They stood together for a while, just watching the orchard breathe in the golden light. As they turned to go, Ben caught sight of something near one of the roots. Not much. Just a depression in the grass, shaped like a body molded by rest. Still faintly warm, and at the edge of it, a single paw print in the soil. Fresh, not deep, not showy, just there. Cal tugged on his hand. "When I see him again, can I tell him thank you?" Ben nodded. "You can tell him anything," he said softly. He already knows. Ben didn't go into the antique store looking for anything. It had been one of those wandering afternoons, brisk, with clouds like pulled wool, and the smell of cinnamon on the wind from a nearby bakery. He passed the shop twice before entering. The awning sagged slightly, faded red. Its window displayed nothing of consequence: an old violin case, a porcelain cat, a stack of napkins embroidered with someone else's initials. A bell tinkled as he stepped inside. The space was narrow, warm with that familiar scent of old pages, pine polish, and soft decay. Wooden shelves bowed beneath knickknacks, trinkets, antiques of every kind. Some things waited, others felt like they'd been forgotten even by time itself. He wandered quietly, touched the rim of an oil lamp with cracked glass, flipped through a stack of postcards, all unsent. Some from places that didn't exist anymore. Then, from behind the small counter, a woman looked up. She wasn't young, but her eyes held a youth untouched by years. Steel gray, rimmed with the colors of dusk. She wore no name tag. Didn't speak at first. Just watched him with a curiosity that felt deeper than surface. "You're not here for furniture," she said at last. Not a question. A knowing. Ben smiled faintly. "Guess not." She nodded once and bent down behind the counter. Rummaging. The shuffle of soft things parting. Then, with care, she straightened and held something out to him. An old frame. Wooden. Slightly cracked along one edge. No label. No mark. Just, waiting. "You should have this," she said, placing it in his hands. Ben looked down. His hands warmed at the corners. Inside the frame, a painting. Watercolor, faded but intact. A modest farmhouse, 2 stories, window panes catching low light. Grass curling gently along the front garden. A winding path. On that path sat a wheelchair. Green. Ben blinked. Closer still, hidden in the brush near the roadside, a dog. Gray. Still. Watching. No face, just the shape of him. The undeniable curve of that back, the tail curled close. Ears pricked. Ben's breath left him quietly. "Is it local?" he asked, not looking at the woman. She smiled faintly. "Depends where you mean by local." He turned the frame over. No signature. No date. "How much?" She tilted her head. "It's not for sale. But it's yours." He hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." He walked home slower than usual. The frame barely weighed anything, but it felt like holding a story he hadn't written but knew by heart. That night, long after dinner, Ben placed the painting on his desk beneath the reading lamp. The light fell across the image just so. He recognized the house. Not exact, but close. Home, as he remembered it in drawings. As it had looked the first time he met him. The garden just after rainfall. The lines of the porch. That long, quiet path. And the dog. Always the dog. He traced the glass lightly with his finger, not touching the paint, just the idea of it. Then sat back in his chair. The room felt fuller somehow. Not crowded. Complete. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. A hush, not absence, not yearning. Just presence. Soothing as a song someone hums only to themselves. Ben whispered, "I wondered if I imagined you." The shadows said nothing, but by the time he turned out the light, a small mark had appeared near the inside of his front door. Nothing dramatic, just a faint, drying paw print. Facing in. Ben returned to the old house in his 70s. Not for any grand purpose, just because some places keep a particular kind of echo, and you have to go back to hear it again. The willow tree still stood at the edge of the hill, bent like a shoulder weary from watching too long. Its branches hung low, ribbons of green and silver that brushed the earth with something between blessing and goodbye. Time had grown moss on the stones around its base, cracked the old fence near the shed, and invited birds to nest where hammers once rang. Ben walked slowly now. No cane, just caution. His joints spoke in murmurs. But still, he made it to the tree before noon. In his coat pocket, a folded paper. A drawing. It wasn't new. Years old, actually. But every line had stayed vivid, unfaded by time or retelling. A boy and a dog, hand in paw, walking beneath the sweep of a willow's shade. He took it out carefully, smoothed the corners as best he could, then knelt, slow, deliberate, and placed it at the base of the tree, tucking one edge gently beneath a stone. The wind lifted a little, brushed his coat, his face, made the branches sway with a soft clatter like distant applause. He didn't say anything, just looked out over the field, the slope down toward the stream, the place where a dog once waited mid-creek as a boy found his feet. The air smelled rich with the memory of rain, though none had fallen in days. He stayed a while, sat on the old bench someone had built long ago, watched dragonflies stitch silence between reeds, listened to the low hum of the earth. When he stood to leave, the sky had dimmed slightly, clouds thickening in the west. He reached back to brush his hand along the bark of the tree, fingers grazing the phantom grooves of the initials he'd once thought to carve, but never had. Then paused. In the grass behind him, nestled softly into the bend of roots and moss, was a shape. Not a full impression, not clawed or dug or marked with pressure. But there, an outline, as if something had lain curled and breathing. As if, just before he turned around, something had risen. Watched. And gone. He took a breath through his nose. Held it, then whispered, "I know." He didn't expect a reply. He didn't need one. Walking back, the wind shifted behind him. Not harsh, more like an exhale. Something old and affectionate. A farewell meant not for endings, but for memory. And memory was enough. The drawing at the base of the tree fluttered once. Settled again. The field, the sky, the willow. All held their breath together. Ben outlived both his parents. That's how time goes, even when it's kind. It keeps moving, the slow and steady tide of it, sweeping everything eventually. He filled the quiet years with small things that added up, teaching, tending the garden, answering children's questions with patient wonder. He was never lonely, not really. But there were mornings that leaned heavy. He never adopted another dog. Not once. People asked, of course. Friends, neighbors, the kids at the clinic. Even his son, once, holding a wagging puppy up like an offering. He always smiled. Not ready yet, he'd say. But what he meant was, I never lost the first one. He moved slower now, read more, listened longer, spoke softly. There was always a gray ribbon tied around the handle of his office drawer. No one knew its story. He never offered. On the night he passed, there was no storm. No thunder. No dramatic pause in the heartbeat of the world. Just sleep. Peaceful, quiet sleep. His son found him the next morning, curled beneath a quilt hand-stitched from old shirts and hospital gowns. His breathing had stopped with such gentleness, even the room hadn't noticed. But something else had. There, on the table beside him, was a photo frame. It stood upright, face down the night before. Now, turned toward the window. The photo inside? A grainy print. Old now, edges curled. A boy standing at the edge of a stream, just mid-step, legs straight, tentative. Beside him, head turned toward the trees, was a gray dog. No collar, no leash, but tethered, nonetheless. Behind the photo, taped with careful precision, was a strip of gray ribbon. It was slightly damp, warm to the touch. No one mentioned it at the service. But those closest to Ben noticed little things in the weeks that followed. In the lobby of his clinic, the plush gray dogs he'd ordered had all arrived, exactly on schedule, even though no one had placed that last order. In the garden, one of the staff found a feather resting upright in the soil near the lavender bed. No bird prints, no breeze. When they packed up his office, the last drawer resisted. Stuck halfway. Inside, a single folded letter he'd written years ago but never mailed. It read only, "If I go before he returns, tell him I waited. Tell him I knew." They didn't know who it was for. But they left it unopened. Some things aren't ours to read. A week later, one of the nurses swore she heard the soft brush of paws on the hallway tile after dark. No one was there, of course. Just the hushed hum of machines and children sleeping. But in the morning, by the door of one of the newer patients, fresh from a recent spill, frightened and stiff, there was a single paw print in the dust. No track. Just one. Small things. Gentle things. Enough. Love, especially the quiet kind, doesn't end. It loops. It lingers. It steps just behind you and whispers with no breath at all. Still with you. They say some dogs are born. And some are sent. That when the veil is thin, between light and dream, between heartbeat and hush, something with fur and purpose appears beside the ones who have forgotten how to hope. At Ben's clinic, the plaque on the wall bears his name in gold letters, though most children don't read it. They look for the mural instead, the trees, the winding path, the boy walking with no footprints behind him. And at his side, always, that gray shadow. The staff don't speak of it much, but they know. Sometimes, when it's very late and the wind skirts the edge of the building like a thought not quite spoken, the motion-activated lights in the therapy room flicker without cause. When it's empty, or should be, one assistant swore she heard a breath. Not a person's, not raspy or tired. Just a soft exhale, like a sigh through fur. She didn't tell anyone for days, until a child, 4 years old, recovering from a bike fall, asked her why there was a dog that didn't bark sleeping under the ballet bar. There was no dog, but the tape mark where the mat ends was disturbed. Just slightly. The feather jar on the counter, meant as a daily affirmation station, started collecting one specific kind. Gray. Too fine, too soft for local birds. They appear overnight, never more than one, never missing when expected, and every so often, a note is left in the mailbox. No return address. No stamp, just a small square of paper. Sometimes with a sentence, sometimes only a word, listening, with you, not done yet. One nurse used to be skeptical, half laughing at the stories, until the power went out during a snowstorm, and she had to calm a child who wouldn't sleep. The boy kept glancing toward the door, then whispered, "It's okay." The quiet dog came back. He said I should rest. After that, she began closing the doors more gently. Ben's son visits often now. He brings his own child, lets them run down the halls when it's empty, small feet echoing like joy set loose. Once, the little one stopped mid-step at the end of the hallway, tilted their head, and smiled into the space beside them. He came back, they said. The soft one. He knows my name. Then turned and kept running. The waiting room has no toys. No TVs. Just books and low light. But children don't seem to mind. Is it true, one girl once asked, that dogs like that live forever? Ben's son thought for a long moment, then said, not exactly. She frowned. Then where do they go? And he answered, they go where they're needed. In the mornings, when the sun first slants through the blinds, there's often a mark by the front mat. One paw print. Suspiciously tidy. As if placed, not pressed. None ever lead in or out. Only that one. Waiting. Someone once tried to mop it away. But by afternoon, it was back. Same size. Same angle. Same hush of presence behind it. Because some things aren't to be cleaned. They're to be understood. Not every dog comes when called. Some arrive in silence and stay longer than their shadow. Some leave no sound, only return. Some are guides not by leash, but by longing. And when they've done what they came to do, they do not vanish. They simply step aside, still watching, still listening, still with you.